Hey, come on in and spend some time with the film hobbyist. My name is Lydia, and I love movies. We're sitting here in a nook of my attic room, a window between us looking out onto my backyard. It's a magnificent spring day, the kind that make some people insist that spring is their favorite season, when it's really just that May is their favorite month. It's 76 degrees out and sunny, but the humidity is still pretty low. The window is open, and a fresh breeze is making the curtains dance. Outside, the grass is technicolor green, and the trees are full of leaves. Everything feels alive and abundant. There's a magic about May, a sense that the whole world lies before you as a possibility. I suppose this partially comes from the indelible impact of the end of the school year, the full trees eliciting a Pavlovian excitement, a whole summer of new or different experiences. As a child, it meant that my job was reading, carrying stacks of books home, ready to conquer the summer reading program early and get all the best prizes. But even as an adult, new plans begin to form. Maybe I could eat lunch outside. Maybe we could take evening walks every week. Maybe we could actually go on an adventure. Until May, spring weather is capricious, meaning that every plan is up in the air, liable to be canceled due to snow. But in May, there's a sense of stability, which opens up to possibility. So it's really quite appropriate that May is the beginning of the so-called summer movie season, the time of year we most associate with blockbusters. The idea of the blockbuster is traced back to two films, 1975's Jaws and 1977's Star Wars, which means that it's half a century old. Wild, considering that we still associate it with new films, when the invention of talkies was closer to that time than the blockbuster is to us. The concept of a blockbuster is technically just related to audience. How many people saw this film? How many times did they go back? How much money did they spend? It must be a crowd pleaser, what's called a four-quadrant film, appealing to both men and women, older and younger than 25. There have been all kinds of blockbusters, comedies, family films, romances, horror, but when you think of the blockbuster, you probably think of an effects-heavy action movie with a romantic subplot. Frankly, this is what Hollywood aims for when it's trying to make a blockbuster. Which explains a lot. The soulless, failed blockbusters that release every summer rely on these ideas but miss something else. A sense of adventure, that thrill of discovery, the pursuit of curiosity, whether that is in learning who these characters are or what world they inhabit, and watching them invent solutions and solve problems. Like, Jaws gets labeled as a horror movie, a monster movie. Well, the first half is, but then it becomes a seafaring adventure, and it's our delight to get to watch these three very different men learn how to connect to each other, make a plan, discovering what they don't know, all before finding a solution to the problem. It's not a case of the first half of the film being better than the second either. People talk about Quint with the same delight and nostalgia that they do about the kills in the first half, and he really isn't in the film at all until the adventure gets going. But of course, you may say, Jaws is the first blockbuster. We didn't get a real sense of what they would become until Star Wars. Much has been written about Star Wars and its influences. Of course, there's science fiction, because it has robots and spaceships and aliens, especially the Flash Gordon space opera side of things. But there's also Dune, the very real sense of groundedness in its world building, alongside the metaphysical discussions influenced by spice and the political implications of a galactic empire. There's a good deal of director Akira Kurosawa in Star Wars, definitely his film Seven Samurai, but particularly Hidden Fortress. That's a wild watch, because you can see a lot of the archetypes Star Wars maps onto, including two peasants on whom C-3PO and R2-D2 are practically rotoscoped. Lots of genre snobs will argue that Star Wars is a Western, especially with how much Han Solo is a space cowboy and Luke is the farm boy going to the big city. But there's one film that absolutely no official film critics credit as being part of the Star Wars soup that I am convinced definitely is. And that would be the 1960 Disney film Swiss Family Robinson, directed by Ken Anakin. I see that look on your face. Yeah, that name. Lucas has denied this as the origin of the name Anakin Skywalker. He said that he pulled the name from Sanskrit, which would line up with a lot of the mythology, Joseph Campbell influences on Star Wars. But it is a weird coincidence. Frankly, a lot of this is weird coincidences. Swiss Family Robinson was released when George Lucas was 16, and though Fritz, Ernst, and Roberta are meant to be in their late teens, this is definitely a kid's movie, and it seems a stretch that he would have watched it. But I have found an interview George Lucas gave where he specifically referenced adventure stories as an influence on Star Wars. Huck Finn, Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and the film Swiss Family Robinson. So I feel I have permission to share with you all the weird coincidences I've logged with this film and Star Wars, and why I think it's worth examining in the context of the blockbuster. What can we learn from a corny, campy Disney film? How can we see what Lucas saw in it? And how can we use that to breathe life into an ecosystem of stale, corporate summer movies? In 1719, British novelist Daniel Defoe published Robinson Crusoe, a first-person narrative that, among other things, tells the story of a man who is the lone survivor of a shipwreck off the coast of Venezuela, who has to build a life for himself on a deserted island. It is kind of the origin of this plot, and it was incredibly popular. Audiences were fascinated by the relatively grounded way Defoe relayed the story, the real nitty-gritty details for what it would take to order one's life after a disaster, scrape out a living in an alien ecosystem, and process the psychological realities of living alone. The book was so popular that it sparked an entirely new genre. The Robinsonade, part survival fiction, part adventure fiction. It's the Castaway novel, but the name helps its audience find it. And that's how we get 1812's The Swiss Family Robinson. Robinson is not their last name. Robinson is the genre. A 2026 version of this title would be The Swiss Family Castaway, like the movie. A lot of Robinsonade stories are solo adventures. That makes a lot of sense, right? It's about having to survive without resources or without community, without infrastructure. But this story is about a family unit immigrating from Switzerland to Australia. They are stranded on a ship when the crew abandons it in the face of a terrible storm, which drives them to an unknown island in the South Pacific. The family unit is a mom and dad and 4 sons. They take the supplies from the ship to the island, set up camp, and eventually build a treehouse. This ends up being a temporary shelter as the mom gets hurt and decides she'd rather live in a cave. They are there for 10 years, meeting various animals, doing various tasks, and I cannot express this to you enough, this book is incredibly boring. Robinson Crusoe is written in first person, and he spends a good portion of the story explaining things to you, the reader. Because of how many characters are in the Swiss Family Robinson, it's told in third person, and most of the book is the father explaining things to his children or lecturing them on morals and virtues. It is an entire novel of exposition. You've heard the epithet, "the book is always better"? This is an exception to that rule. In 1960, films were required to start with credits. But unlike other contemporary films that had the credits as a separate entity or over B-roll footage, these credits serve as a prologue. We begin with the ship tossed in the storm, driven by wind, dark storm clouds in the background with the credits projected over top. And then, partway through, we get a short scene. We hear the family yelling for help, the 2 older sons and their father banging on the locked door, shutting them in their cabin. Mother grabs her youngest son and begins to pray. More footage of the ship, with credits, as it heads for a cluster of rocks. We hear a terrible sound, and then we get another short scene. "She's hit something," explains father. And then we're back to the ship, wrecked on the rocks, as the credits finish out. This makes an incredibly efficient use of credits. The adventure has already begun. Where is the ship? Why is this family locked in their cabin? Why is no one coming to help them? How will they get out of this situation? All of these questions are the promise of discovery. Your curiosity is piqued. You want to go on this adventure with this family. You've also already experienced the thrill of the sublime, another frequent aspect of adventure. There will be danger ahead. Are you ready? Okay, now for weird coincidence time. How does Star Wars begin? Yes, without credits. George Lucas got kicked out of the Directors Guild for that. But the actual scene? It begins with a ship being chased by a much larger ship, exchanging gunfire, and then we go on to the smaller ship, watching everyone in turmoil as our initial point-of-view characters navigate their way through the chaos. I'm not saying this is a copy of a 1960s Disney movie. I'm saying that both are based on the premise that you should jump into the action as quickly as possible to pull your audience into an adventure. There's the promise of discovery. Why is that ship being chased? What did they do wrong? How did these robots get thrown into this mess? The sense of danger. That Star Destroyer looks so huge. It's existentially huge. An instant emotional connection. I think a lot of failed blockbusters try to do this with a cold open, but they forget that the promise of discovery only works if you actually discover something interesting and equally exciting. Curiosity is only good if it's satisfied. A hook is only as good as what it pulls you into. But a cold open, for the sake of a cold open, isn't worth it. You need both, the curiosity and the result. Swiss Family Robinson doesn't follow the usual 3-act structure with an inciting incident, a third into the film, and a lowest point 2/3 in. What it does have are 3 distinct parts threaded together. Part 1 covers the building of a raft, traveling to the islands, collecting supplies, setting up camp, and building the iconic treehouse. This is the part of the film most connected to the book, a good deal of which focuses on the animals they bring from the ship and the ones they encounter on the island. Here, Father is our protagonist. We watch him rally up his sons to make camp, decide to settle on the island rather than just wait on the beach for a ship, and build a state-of-the-art 1950s house in a tree out of bamboo and string, complete with running water, a fridge, and a sunroof in the bedroom. As boring as all of that sounds, this film succeeds because it understands how to turn the ordinary into an adventure. Rafting to shore is a whitewater rapids adventure. Will the captain's dogs be able to swim to them, or will their weight capsize the raft? Collecting supplies is an adventure. They spot another ship, but it's actually a ship full of pirates, the very ship that chased them into the storm in the beginning. When they travel back to the mainland with the ship's animals, they face the threat of sharks. And even showing off their new home includes the excitement of discovery. Frankly, the tour of the house is really cool. It's the solving a problem part of adventure. There's so much excitement in the set design and its reveal of every little part of this building. No wonder they put it in Disneyland as an attraction. It doesn't need to be a ride. Just a walkthrough is pretty cool. There aren't any weird coincidences between this and Star Wars, but it's still clear that Lucas learned the same lesson, that even the ordinary should be an adventure. Take our introduction to Luke. It's a simple scene of a boy and his uncle shopping for supplies. But the way the scene unfolds, it feels like an adventure. 3PO and R2 don't know why they're stopping, and that sparks curiosity. We watch the Jawas unload them with a lot of questions about what exactly is happening. Then we see Uncle Owen and Luke, and we begin to understand. But instead of a simple scene of purchasing droids, we have a little bit of a story as another unit is picked instead. A deviation that has inspired so much curiosity that it led to an actual canon short story. Too many blockbusters leave in the scene where the character gets into his car, because it's product placement, but don't let that ordinary be an adventure. Or they make the mistake of skipping the ordinary under the assumption that it's boring, without taking the time to let the ordinary be the adventure. Part 2 of Swiss Family Robinson takes a turn into plot. Older sons, Fritz and Ernst, leave on a trip to circumnavigate the island. Partway through, they run into the same pirates who have kidnapped a ship captain and his grandchild, a cabin boy. They free the grandchild, but the captain negotiates to be taken as ransom. Their canoe struck against the rocks in the ocean. The boys have to walk home. Along the way, they discover that the grandchild is actually a girl named Roberta. This chunk of the film makes the bold choice to change protagonists. In part 1, Fritz and Ernst are very much supporting characters, there to fill out the story. Fritz doesn't have much of a personality, and Ernst is there as comedic relief, eager and bookish, a know-it-all who doesn't, actually. But in part 2, we get to know them more intimately. Instead of just a string of adventures, we are on a journey of discovery for who these people are. Learning their wants and strengths and weaknesses is just as much a part of the adventure as running from pirates or navigating the jungle. We also get the girl into the mix. While Roberta is a damsel in distress on paper, the number of times she's just supposed to burst into tears, actress Janet Monroe gives her an active presence. She's skittish and awkward before her identity is revealed, and her actions to the discomfort of the situation is frankly more relatable to an audience who is both thrilled and a little disgusted at the idea of crawling through mud or interacting with violent wildlife. Unlike Temple of Doom's Willie Scott, she largely swallows her screams. Later, she displays a confidence with the use of a firearm and courage in the face of violence. She's not quite a Princess Leia, but she's definitely a stepping stone on the way. And speaking of Princess Leia, it's time for another weird coincidence. During part 2, while wading through a river, Fritz is attacked by a green anaconda, which pulls him underwater. Roberta screams and scrambles up the riverbank as Fritz shouts, "Ernst, the knife! The knife!" while he struggles with the snake. The boys fight with the creature until both emerge, shaken, cut, and having lost their compass. I am convinced that Lucas used this scene as inspiration for the trash compactor creature in Star Wars. It's not an exact copy, but it feels rotoscoped, capturing the chaos, the thrashing water, the bizarre comedy. Shoot it! Where? Anywhere! The girl trying to stay out of the way, and it all being over rather suddenly. Lucas also uses a shift in protagonists. Luke doesn't even arrive in the movie until almost 20 minutes in, Han Solo until 45. Leia only gets a handful of words, mostly her recorded message, until she takes control of the story at an hour 15. All of these character entrances come with the promise of discovery and a delightful story shift. Each introduction kicks the story into a higher gear of adventure, the complication of the character dynamic fueling the excitement. This is only worth doing if the characters aren't cardboard thin. James MacArthur might be a bit of a wooden actor, but his character Fritz has enough interest on the page to fuel the story anyway. Meanwhile, Star Fox in the Super Mario Galaxy movie looks cool, and people say he's cool, but there's no sense of discovery, nothing to uncover in his dynamic with literally any character in that film. It's the reveal and the depth that makes an audience sit up and lean in. Part 3 is a war film. Fritz and Ernst and Roberta bring father news of the pirates, and he deduces that they will return. They all prepare for how they'll protect themselves from the attack, and then we see the battle actually play out. Swiss Family versus pirates. Now feels like an appropriate time to actually address the pirates, and my conflicted feelings on them. As a 90s kid, these pirates felt very fresh and interesting. They were pretty much the only pirates I grew up watching who weren't British. They're Asian, which means their ship has a distinct style, and so do their outfits. I didn't grow up in the wake of World War II and the Korean War, on the precipice of Vietnam, when the yellow peril, warped, racist depiction of Asians as superstitious savages was a primary depiction. My cultural soup had its own problems. Mystical Orientalism shows up in so many 80s and 90s kids' movies. But I didn't understand that most of the extras in Swiss Family Robinson are in yellow or brown face, and that the captain's dialogue is unnaturally broken English. But the actor who plays the pirate captain, Sesu Hayakawa, does an amazing job. He's terrifying and clever and campy. Reminds me a lot of Geoffrey Rush's performance as Captain Barbossa in Pirates of the Caribbean. I wish he could have been given better dialogue and a less racist cast, because he is such a formidable villain for this kid's adventure movie. But back to part 3. Father quite literally stands on the battlefield and sketches out the methods the family will use to defeat the pirates. Methods we watch them build and prepare, yet the actual execution of each booby trap and weapon is so satisfying that nothing is spoiled by knowing. In fact, knowing what will come next is a build of suspense, an incredibly satisfying piece of dramatic irony as we know what will come next, and the pirates don't. George Lucas understood this satisfaction, and it's a big part of Star Wars. We get a whole scene where the general tells the exact plan to the pilots for destroying the Death Star, complete with visual depiction. And it spoils nothing for the battle to come. Part of this is that the visual display is all crude vector graphics. It's so different from the actual battle that nothing is spoiled. But we get the setup of how small their target is, and despite Luke's confidence, we begin to wonder if they'll actually pull it off. But because we don't know what their ships will look like flying in space or the actual dangers of the Death Star battle, all of which become shockingly real to us as the battle begins. Bad blockbusters may add a planning scene with the assumption that the point is to explain what's about to happen. That isn't the case. The point is to build anticipation. I don't think it's wrong to skip the planning or to layer it all on top of each other. Ocean's 11 is amazing at that. But I think it's easy to forget the excitement of setting up a plan and watching it play out. To see young Francis explain how he's going to catch his tiger and then watch the tiger fall into its pit where it leaps out to chase the pirates late into Act 3. I can't prove how much of Swiss Family Robinson is in Star Wars, or by proxy, the last 50 years of blockbusters. It might just be a coincidence that the weapons the Ewoks use to defeat the stormtroopers in Return of the Jedi use the same log and stone construction that our Swiss family uses. Maybe this was just a subconscious influence, like Ken Anakin's last name made the Sanskrit name stick more firmly in Lucas's head. I just can't get over how much adventure is in the blockbuster's DNA, and how much of that genre or its spirit has been forgotten by men in boardrooms. But you know a good adventure when you see it. And I hope we'll see more of them here, on the cusp of summer. Thanks for coming.